get started. Welcome, everyone. This is a Proposal Writing Academy, the first of 4 in a series, and I am Jessica Early. I'm a professor in this department in English education, and I run the Central Arizona Writing Project, which is professional development for K through university teachers in the teaching of writing. It's connected to the National Writing Project. And I started writing grants when I was a doctoral student years ago. I've been at ASU for 18 years. I never took a course on grant writing. My work as a researcher is writing research, teaching teachers to teach writing. So I thought, and I talked to Ron Brolio, who's the director of the Humanities Institute, and I was like, you know what, this would be something. We have so many resources on campus, and we get emails, and we get information about grant writing, but if you've never written grants or fellowships, it can feel daunting. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, the support actually feels sometimes overwhelming, because there's different levels of support and there's unit level, and then there's university level and business office. I just was so confused for the first number of years. So one of the things that we want to do is to kind of demystify the process, and also to be really hands-on and pragmatic and get you started in the next few weeks writing something for a real audience and purpose, whether it's a deadline that's nearing or one that's next year that you're hoping to apply for. So we'll think about that. I normally, if I were in person with you, I'd be standing up and moving around the room, but we are doing this in a hybrid way. So we have wonderful participants on Zoom and then also in the room. So welcome, everyone. What I'd love for you to do, hello, is to just take a minute in the Zoom chat and then in the room to share your name and what department or unit you're from, what you do, so we can just get a sense of everybody, and people in Zoom can have that as well. So why don't you guys in the room kind of turn to each other and around. So I want to also introduce my collaborator and co-host of the workshops in the next four weeks, Courtney Berg, who is on the screen there. She is Zooming in because she does not live here in Arizona, but she is in a very important part of grant writing here. Oh, someone wants in the back. So I'll let Courtney introduce herself really fast so we can hear your voice.
Hi everyone, I'm Courtney Berg. I am the research admin in Humanities Institute. It's nice to see you all.
Thank you, Courtney. So she'll be taking part, and she's helped. I accidentally just muted you, Courtney, and I didn't mean to, so you can unmute. So I want to talk about the goals for this first workshop and the next 4 weeks. So the 4 weeks are divided in this way. Number 1, today we are going to be looking at resources, kind of pinning or nailing down some calls for proposals, and you may already know exactly what you are interested in doing. If it's a fellowship for your research or for dissertation, whether it's something you've had in the back burner that you've wanted to do and you just haven't for a couple years, whether it's a seed grant for HI, for Humanities Institute, or the Social Sciences Research Institute. We have a lot of opportunities here on campus, so I often encourage myself and others to start there, because and then you can build from that. But that's the main thing we're going to work on today, is actually figuring out, what do I want to apply for? It could be due in December, it could be due in January, or it could be due a year from now. It doesn't really matter. The more we kind of think through now, the better prepared you are to turn that in. So there are some deadlines on campus, like the women and philanthropy, and that call for proposals happens every year really early in the semester. So when I got that grant long time ago, I actually wrote it really early so that I was ready. I didn't want to spend my summer working on it, so I worked on it sort of the year before, thinking it through and getting it ready, and then I was tweaking it in the summer so I could turn it in. So just to say, you don't have to have something that's immediately has an immediate deadline. You can take your time. And then if you're a graduate student thinking of a fellowship, you don't want it too far in advance because you want to finish and get funding for what you need to do. So we can also talk about that. But that's our goal for today, is to identify opportunities, think about where we want to apply, think about our keywords and focus, and then to get a sense of the resources that we have available, and create a calendar and plan for sort of working backwards from our deadline. Next week, we're going to talk about budgets. I often start with the budget. Once I know what I'm applying for, your budget is your argument. And so we're going to talk about how to create a budget, how to work with your research officers like Courtney. There are people here on campus who help you with the budget. This is not something, especially in the humanities, that we have a lot of training in. So my training has come with support and years of doing. But you don't have to know what you're doing to have a great budget, because you have the support like Courtney, people here to do that. And then the third week, we are going to really work on drafting. In the fourth week, we're going to get feedback. And every week, we have a wonderful visiting speaker who will, and one of our visiting speakers is here right now, and she's going to speak in a few minutes, and we'll introduce her. But each week, we've invited someone who has had great success writing grants in different ways, in different disciplines. And then at the end, we've invited the editor who is from OCAD. We have editors who are here and free who will read our grants for us. So he's going to zoom in from Seattle and talk about the services that we have on campus and kind of what he does and how he helps. I didn't know about the free editing services until like a year ago. I wish I'd known that a long time. Some of the things that we have on campus, it feels like there's spaceships floating around, and you have to figure out how to zoom up to get help. And they probably wouldn't appreciate me saying that, but that sometimes is how it feels. So I want to give you guys, Courtney and I are trying to show you like how to get to the spaceship to get the help. So one of the things that we're going to talk about are sort of thinking about keywords. And it's hard to narrow down the focus of all that we do and care about to 5 keywords. But it really helps in thinking about doing a search for calls for proposals, and for figuring out kind of where to focus your time and energy. The other thing is that if you're trying to figure out what you want to apply for, there's so much information available depending on your discipline. So in the Humanities Institute actually has a newsletter that Courtney prepares and they disseminate. And with the newsletter, there are often options for calls for proposals and upcoming deadlines for research. So you can join the newsletter of like the Humanities Institute or the Social Science Research Institute or whatever discipline you're in that already sends out information. And I always look like, does that apply to me?
Jake is actually creating a grants digest that goes out every 2 weeks that has funding opportunities specific to humanities.
Which is awesome. So the main thing I've learned is to sign up for the newsletters, because the information is really helpful. And I didn't know that you had to sign up to get, I don't know, just sign up for the newsletters, because then it just comes through, and it's not spam, it's helpful, awesome information. The other thing to know is Knowledge Enterprise, and this is the big spaceship above floating around. I don't actually know where it's located on campus, but this is sort of the higher up, past the unit, past the college, and they are here to support us. The main person who communicates with OCAD for you when you're writing a grant is your Courtney, your research. What's your title, Courtney? I don't want to.
Research admin.
Okay, research admin. That's who communicates with OCAD. You almost never do. I have, on the rare occasion, I've partnered and collaborated and written really huge, like multi-million-dollar grants. Didn't get them, but have gotten one. But at that level, you're working more closely with OCAD, but through your research admin. It's kind of like the same way we work in, if you want to communicate, if you're a doc student, you first go to your chair or your advisor, and then your advisor goes to the chair. Like there's a ladder of communication. So I'm not directly, OCAD doesn't want me directly writing, they want Courtney. But you want to know, though, that OCAD's here and has a ton of information that's helpful. And often, like, Courtney goes to their resources to answer questions for me, if that makes sense. But sometimes you can go on here and you can find information about finding funding, developing a proposal, events and networking. So they have resources that are really useful. Some of them felt kind of macro and far away for me when I was starting out. But I just want you to know that that's there as a resource. And then you have to figure out, you all know your area of research and your focus, so you have to figure out kind of where the funding is for you and what you do. And I'm going to share some examples of what I do and where it is for me, but that won't necessarily be relevant for you. So you want to think about your professional circles and communities. So, there's big ones like NSF. I have actually gotten an NSF grant that was a collaboration between the National Writing Project and the National Science Foundation. But for the most part, I'm not writing grants for NSF because of the work I'm doing. Ford Foundation is something, there's different foundations. Spencer Foundation is one that I've written for. You will find the foundations in the funding source and may already know some of them. But we're also here to help you with that. And Courtney can help you in the next few weeks with that as well. So anyway, those are our goals. What I'm going to have you do now, and for those on Zoom, we're going to do this writing at the same time as those in person. I'd like you to think about, and you can pull out a computer, piece of paper, something to write on, back at your hand, whatever is helpful. And I'd like you to think about these 5 things. Kind of what are some of the key words for your work that you're interested in getting funding for? What are your goals? So for me, my actual research can be funded by grants because I'm a social scientist. For others, you may be doing, you might be a literature scholar and you're doing work that you don't actually need money to do. The research in the archives, sometimes we need money to go to archives to do our work. So that's a good reason to get funding. But sometimes you want to make your work, make it public facing. And there's funding to do that. So sometimes it's about taking your research and opening it up to a broader audience. And sometimes it's just really pragmatic. Like I just wrote a grant for MLA with Brian Goodman in literature, and we want to create more opportunities for recruitment in the English department. And so we wrote a grant, and they have this in MLA. Who knew? Courtney and Jeffrey, my dean, helped us learn about this opportunity. We wrote, it's only $10,000, but $10,000 can do a lot. So that's a really pragmatic thing. I want to have a more welcoming orientation event for first-year students. I'm going to find money to do that. Does that make sense? And that's not connected to my research. It's connected to my service. So I'm going to be quiet, and we're going to have 3 minutes, which is not very long. The goal is to just keep your fingers typing or your pen or pencil moving, and we'll go for it. Right. Speak in just a minute. But one of the first steps, and we're going to have time for this today, is to think about our internal and external funding sources. And I have a picture here of, oh my God, what is this fruit? Pomegranate. I have this in my backyard and the birds are eating the fruit. I should have covered them. But what this is an image of is thinking about low-hanging fruit. So what do we have on campus that's close by that we can apply for? So the Humanities Institute has this amazing seed grant program that is here to support faculty and fund our research ideas. And it's a launching place so that you get money to either for you individually or to collaborate as a team and do work. So I've done that recently, and it actually helped launch this research, a new research program that I'm focused on doing an analysis of 50 years of writing research. So I started with the seed grant, and then now I've applied to 2 other funding sources because it's a big project. And I've traveled to Paris with my research team over the summer to present our initial findings. It's really amazing, and I couldn't have done that. And now I'm applying for grants so that I can get the software I need to do some of the coding. It's one thing leads to the next, and it creates a stronger argument. So you can think about what is here that we already have, and there's funding for graduate students, there's dissertation fellowships and programs through the graduate college. But then you can also think about your professional organizations. So for me, in English education, NCTE has a space online that's for research, and they have research foundation grants and different deadlines. So I bookmark this page because it's one of my professional organizations, and I often just check it to see what they have and who's eligible. So that's one of the most important things, because they can have stuff and it's not necessarily, a lot of times they have funding for classroom teachers, like K through 12 teachers. I can't apply for that. But then I go here and look at what's available, and I ended up writing a grant connected to this 4C's research initiative. They have grants, and it's a little print and you have to look, but they had a grant that was due, and I applied for it. I think it was for $8,000. And that was for the study that I told you about that I'm working on. So one of the things to do right away is to think about your professional organizations and to look what they have. The next, I have the National Writing Project, and I am a director of a site in the National Writing Project, and I often get grants that are kind of sub-grants under what they're doing. So they get a big multi-million-dollar grant, and then they filter funds to universities to do the work, and I often apply for those and get those. And then there's things like Spencer Foundation, and they have grants that are early scholars awards. So if you're a brand new assistant professor in your first 5 years, that's a great grant to apply for. And then they have grants that are more focused on specific causes and interests. So just looking and searching is worth your time. And to know, just like doing library research, the looking and searching can take time, and that time is part of your writing process. But you can also go to Courtney and say, hey, these are my keywords. These are my research questions. This is where I'm at in my, I'm a brand new assistant professor, or I'm a doc student about to do my research, wherever you're at. And then Courtney knows where to look, and she can help you, and that's her job. But really, my biggest advice is to start with the low-hanging fruit. It's competitive, but it's not as competitive as, I'm more likely to get a grant through the Humanities Institute than I am through the National Science Foundation when I'm starting out, or ever. And just because of the numbers of people applying. And if I get that grant from the Humanities Institute, it will then launch me into the next thing, and I can say, I have this funding, I did this, and now I want to do this. So it puts you in a better place for external funders. The other thing is that you can have opportunities that are completely applicable to your work, but are outside of your normal organizations. And this is something I've learned over time, and I'm still learning. Like the MLA grant that I just wrote with Brian Goodman, had no idea. MLA is I've never gone to MLA. It's weird because I'm in an English department, and MLA is a huge deal, but in my work, it's not. But MLA has these wonderful STEP grants, and our dean, Jeffrey, told Brian and I about this, and I was like, wait a minute, I wish I'd known about these. They're amazing, and they're really well organized, and they're really concrete, and you can see the kinds of grants they fund and look at the past funders and think, oh, I could do a project like that. I already have, this is a good fit for me. So finding organizations and funding sources that are a little bit in the periphery of your vision, in your professional world. So MLA, I've always thought, well, I have to be a lit scholar, or I'm not, and it's not true. So that's one of the things that's really opened up. Or this 4Cs grant, I used to go to the C's as a doc student, and it's more for people who are teaching writing at the college level, doing rhetoric and composition. And but they fund work in writing research more broadly. I don't have to just be doing research on writing at the college level to apply for their research grant, so I did. Because the work that I'm doing with this 50-year analysis would actually really benefit the 4Cs. Who knows if I'll get it, but I applied because it's enough connected. So I think thinking about that, and then AZ Humanities is also a great place to start. They offer grants like $2,000 to $3,000 to $5,000, and these are wonderful hands-on kind of grants. It's also an example of low-hanging fruit in that it's local, it's close, it's not as competitive as these huge sponsors, but they're wonderful and they give wonderful publicity and support. The thing I've learned over time is that you can do a ton with, like, you don't have to get $1 million grant to do amazing work. You can get $3,000 and it'll transform your work in huge ways. And $3,000 you can actually hire a research assistant, an undergrad research assistant, to do work over a semester that will transform what you're doing. So I think to not be snobby, to start small is actually really important. And in the humanities, we have to think small because the funding's a lot more limited than if I was in NASA and doing that kind of work. So that's what some of the work, I'm just foregrounding this because this is the work you're going to be doing today. It's kind of looking in your organization. Some of you already know, I want to go for this grant. I always have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. I assume I'm not going to get the first grant. And if I do, I'm super stoked. But I think kind of having 2 or 3 options is really important. Before we go on, though, I want to have time. We're going to have our special guest share with us today, Shiela Black, and Courtney's going to introduce her. Shiela and Courtney have worked together, and Shiela has years of experience grant writing. Yeah. So she's going to come up here in my seat and talk for about 15 minutes about her experience. And one of the things to know is that all of our guest speakers have the experience in their own fields, in their own positions, in their own work in connection to grant writing. And you could easily say, well, this doesn't apply to me. I want to go do field work, and this is about poetry writing or whatever. Not true. Like, grant writing is grant writing. It's a genre that crosses disciplines and fields. And so I think understanding that is really important, and learning from other people's experience has helped me more than anything else in my work writing. So come on up, and then Courtney, you want to do the intros?
Sure. We're excited to have Shiela Black here to present to you. Shiela has many years of development experience, including working as a development officer for the Colonias Development Council in New Mexico. She's also been an executive director of Gemini Inc., the San Antonio Literary Arts Center, and also for the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. She is also a poet who has authored 5 poetry collections and 3 chapbooks. Her most recent collection is Radiant Dream. She is assistant director of the Virginia G. Piper Center for the Creative Writing at ASU.
Hi, everyone. Jessica had a lot of the points I was going to make, which is exciting. And I have to say, I was flattered when Courtney asked me, because I always feel that I've done a lot of fundraising, but I still use kind of low-tech and high-tech methods. I think what you'll find is there is such a wealth of grant information out there. So how do you sort out which ones you should apply to? And like Jessica, I'm a big fan of getting a couple of newsletters. I always subscribe to the Philanthropy News Digest. It's free. It sends you an email every week or so, every day really, that says these RFPs are open, and it'll have a link to different RFPs in different areas. Now, I wish that this digest covered every grant that's out there, but it really doesn't. So I think when you're grant hunting, you're kind of scanning the landscape, and then you're honing in specifically. And I've always found that one of the big challenges in grant world, when there's so much out there, is you don't, and I've done it, believe me, you don't want to spend a huge amount of effort on a grant that really isn't going to fit your project. And that can be hard to figure out when you're starting out. I know there were times when they call it mission creep in nonprofit world. You see a grant that offers lots of money and it's got one little thing that's like what you're doing and you try to stretch it. And that usually does not work. I'm here to kind of testify. So part of what you're doing when you're figuring out where do I find grant opportunities is you often are retrofitting it. Some strategies I recommend. If you're a researcher, for example, look at someone that you admire or who's done work like what you're doing and look at who funded them. When I was at Literary Arts Center, and I was the ED of a literary arts center, and there's limited funding for creative writing. So I went to all the websites of all the people who nationwide were great creative writing centers, and I looked at who funded them, and then I followed those places. And often, even when you're thinking about the federal government, say you're in the humanities, you could go to the Federal Register, which is the list of all grant opportunities, and drown, but you can say, okay, I'm in the humanities, I'm going to go on the National Endowment for the Humanities website and look at all their grants. And those are very competitive, and the other thing I recommend doing is don't be shy about speaking to program officers, because sometimes you think, my project's got a shot, and you read it and it sounds the same, and then you talk to them and you realize, oh, not quite. Right? And then, you kind of will find that, and what Jessica said about low-hanging fruit is really true. Because, for example, if you're in the arts or the humanities, you have, say, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation. They almost always filter their money also down to state entities. The state entities are the greatest gateway a grant writer can really have. For example, as Jessica was saying, the National Endowment for the Humanities has many grant opportunities, and I do recommend getting to know those. But Arizona Humanities has mini grants and project grants every year with multiple deadlines. And what's sort of good about those as the entry level is they're not so hard to get. They're fairly consistent. For example, if you're a researcher and you want to do a public event every year, right? Arizona Humanities has a mini grant that's $2,500, which is pretty good for one event, and you can probably get it multiple years, maybe not multiple times a year, but multiple years. And I segue into that because that was when I raised about $700,000, just under $700,000 a year when I was at Gemini Inc. And, we were a creative writing center, so it wasn't like NASA with big grants. And the way we were able to survive was a combination of a few big sort of national funders and really knowing our local landscape. And so I think that even though academic funding's a bit different, it's kind of similar. You look around for people in your state or area who might be interested, and you look at who nationally you really want to have funding you. And I think that you also create enough of those newsletter things that you're able to kind of randomly scan the landscape without spending hours doing it. I will mention a couple of sources that might be useful. Everybody used to always talk about the Foundation Center, and that was the big place you went and looked for grants, and they rebranded themselves as something called Candid. And I think they're still probably the biggest grant database around. It's quite expensive. I don't know if the English department or Oakwood is a member, but Candid, to be sort of equitable community, in terms of people were saying, you're not being community friendly, has created nationwide all these free access points in local libraries. Oddly enough, not ASU's library, but if you go to Scottsdale, Tempe, Phoenix, you can on their computer access Candid database for free. And that's where I wouldn't recommend doing it all the time because it's like going in the deep dive, but if you have an idea what you're looking for and you want to see everything out there, it's a really great way to sort of go in and find all the potential. I recommend going in and saying, who in my area might fund the things I'm working on and spend, an afternoon in the public library deep diving into what used to be the Grant Center, but now Foundation Center and is now Candid. I've also used Grant Gopher with some luck, or is that what it's called, Grant Gopher? You can Google it, it's like the gopher animal. They have a $9 a month membership, which I've never purchased, but you can do sort of a search pretty easily, and it'll turn up national grants, and then you could search in your area. And they tempt you, they'll say there's 31 grants, but I found if you just kind of randomly search them over a week, you're gonna kind of, you have to sign up and get a free account. But on the whole, what I find is when you've been doing it for a while, you're gonna have a pretty good idea of the landscape of who's funding in your area, And there's always the potential of new things, but it honestly, from my experience, is not an infinite landscape most of the time. And so I'm just telling you all this to avoid you spending hours searching and, so you want to get enough. That's why I always recommend doing a lot of looking at what other people in your field have been, like retrofitting it, so that you're sort of narrowing down that vast landscape by looking at what organizations your work adjacent to or people your work adjacent to, where have they gotten funding? I've even gone as far as looking at people's CVs online.
I do too.
Yeah, and seeing who funded their projects. And believe it or not, that's been a better way for me, because it's like it takes out the huge white noise of the huge landscape, and I go, oh, so-and-so did a thing on disability poetry and XXX funded them. Well, they may fund me. And then it's a funny mixture. I know I'm not here to talk about grant writing, but I think a thing that I've always found very reassuring about it is you will not get every grant you apply for, but once you write a couple of solid ones, you're really recycling them and refiguring them. And sometimes that refiguring is quite creative. You actually gain new insights into, what the nature of your project is by putting a good spin on it. And then, really, as Jessica said, believe it or not, it's the least glamorous parts of your grant that often give it the most legs. The budget's an argument, the activities, and somewhat the outcomes are an argument. Or if you're applying for a fellowship, then it's much more a story of the potential of what your research is going to do. And always being fairly, honestly, accurate. It's not something they always teach you, but always being, when I started out grant writing, and I've gotten all sorts of grants in my life. I've been funded by Kellogg, Ford, Mellon, yeah. And I've also gotten federal grants. Those were the biggest grants I ever got. And they weren't for me. They were actually the very start of my career. When I didn't really know what I was doing, I got 2 HUD grants. So they were like $1 million grants. But they were for, things people could very easily understand. But in every case, it was the more modest and grounded my grant was, the less rhetorical. Because when I started, I was a poet, and I loved using really moving rhetoric. I would, pour that into the grants. And occasionally I learned to, that as long as there was a solid center somewhere, and it was fairly simply and lucidly explained, which is hard, the grants did much better. And then every now and then, if you're in a really competitive position with a grant, you can do something creative, and it sometimes really works for you. Once I was in a grant pool that was enormously competitive to get a grant to do community organizing, and it was a 5-year program in communities. And I went to the grant meeting, and there were communities from all over the country there, and I thought, oh my goodness, and I was in Little New Mexico working with farm workers, right? And I sort of had written my grant. We were going to have all these debates, and then I thought I have to do something to stand out. So I scrapped the grant I'd done, reduced the activities to 1 paragraph, and the rest was a conversation between 2 of the farm worker organizers that I sort of transcribed and edited a little, and I got the grant. Go figure. But on the whole, that's not probably the best example, that sort of groundedness and that reassurance that it's kind of an organic give and take. Pay attention to their guidelines. Don't try to stretch too far, but also have the security that, once you start writing them, you will be able to use them. That's what I think is always, it's not make or break every time. It's really kind of, that's why I said it's like scanning a landscape. You kind of are looking at, and I definitely recommend never scorning the low-hanging fruit, because if you get in the steady habit of a few funders who will give you 5, 8, 10, every few years, that's actually, you can accomplish quite a lot. And it also prepares you to do those really big, $1 million grants or $200,000 grants that are harder to get sometimes. I'm trying to think what else I do to search out grants. I think the way to do it is to really make that quick scan part of your work routine. Like you have a draft written, it could be just your basic grant template, and then you're sort of scanning, where can it go? And being prepared to change it to fit their questions, because as you've probably all learned from grants, another part of it is they ask a question, you answer it to some degree. You want to do it in a compelling way, using quotes, stories. In fact, grant writing is the best example I can think of in some ways of what we teach everyone in composition. In a grant, when you're looking at your grant, you're making a claim, you're providing evidence. Making a claim, providing evidence. Yes?
I think from what I heard, we get a lot of help here, but you haven't spoken to those like finicky parts of the grant, right? Like for me, it's just the idea of when I just see all the requirements, it's just overwhelming. I just want to get to writing about what I care about. So like, can you speak to that?
We'll talk about it too.
Yeah, well, the finicky requirements are usually a few documents, right? I mean, are you talking about things like the 501c3?
I don't know, when I just think of grants, I just think there's a lot of stuff that I'm gonna be like, oh my God.
Well, I think that they seem very finicky at first because they're always asking for a lot of attachments and things that seem hard. And I recommend just breaking them down into discrete tasks and not, I was very scared of them. I mean, for years, the idea of going on national, NEA had a notoriously difficult website, and their grant asks for many things. And you go on and you see all the tabs and you think, oh my goodness. And then you realize none of those things in and of themselves are very complicated. They will be, for a nonprofit, it'll be things like your 501c3, your nonprofit certification, your financial record. Well, Courtney will help you with that. The foundation has all those documents. They may ask for letters of recommendation. The finickiest parts are probably the budget, right? And when you haven't done too many budgets, it seems frightening, but it really, again, is a question of being systematic and accurate. You say, what is this actually going to cost me? And you calculate your own time or other people's time at the rate that your hourly salary would be, or you look up what an airfare to, like say you want to go to Paris, which would be lovely, to study, you look up what the standard airfare is, you put that in. You just sort of construct it. And once you're used to it, and the other part that I think is really, I think the first time you do it, it feels like doing your taxes for the first time. It's overwhelming, right? But then you're always kind of copying what you've done before to some degree. So once you generate those materials once, they're going to be the same across most grants. I mean, there's really very little they ask. The other finicky part that always agitates people is the sort of question of they want to know your I still mess up the words unless I'm looking at a grant, but it's the outcomes versus they want you to give your outcomes. And they're always telling you those aren't the same as, for example, your outcome isn't that you held 20 classes, right? It's what was the result of those 20 classes. The other part that always scares people is, how am I going to evaluate this? And there's a lot of good material online about how you design evaluation or how you think about evaluation. And it depends what you're applying for. For a fellowship, they may not ask you. But again, I think it's a balance of being honest and also retrofitting ways you're going to measure your I mean, as researchers, you have to do that anyway, so it's pretty much what you're already doing. But say it's a public event, right? And you're like, what evaluation am I going to do? And, sometimes they will want something that tracks its impact. Like, and usually you can do something like increased awareness of, I mean, in my field, it can get quite vague, like increased awareness of writing tools is something I do a lot in creative writing. And the way I might measure that is in my course evaluations, I will like ask that question, like name a writing tool. Did you feel that you learned more about what an image does, right? Yes or no, and then I can say, well, that's a very bad example I'm making, but you can say like, yeah, 67% of the people said they knew more about what an image is, you know? And you're often having to, you know, think about that, but there's a lot of good tools for that, and those are the most finicky parts, I think. And I think the other finicky part is spending time really figuring out your program enough that you feel comfortable with it. Honestly, the biggest mistake I made when I was a very young development person was we'd come up with these, I felt like just like a kid when they go to college and they write their first composition paper, they feel like they have to sound intelligent, so they're sort of clouding the issue with all these words. I learned that grants are pretty unforgiving that way. You have to figure out, and you have to know the program you're doing, you know, and that's hard. And I guess similarly when you are writing, say, for a fellowship or something that's about your research, you know, you have to do that anyway. But it's just clearly articulating the boundaries of that, which is not easy. And so I recommend that people spend a lot of time on the why paragraph and write it and cut it in half or something. And then the rest is pretty, you know, it's not always the why paragraph, it's, you know, what will be the impact? What's the change? Why is this important? That paragraph. And just making it very lucid. Because I've also been a grant judge, and you'll read a lot of them. And so it's honestly the ones where you're like, oh, I know what they're doing, and I know why they want to do that. Those ones you tend to like, right? Whereas the more rhetorical ones that you might like, you might say, that's a beautiful sentence. This person writes so beautifully, but I have no idea what their project is. You know? So it's err on the side of fairly straightforward and fairly concise. And also, you know, just I think for people who are getting started, I feel like what helped me a lot, I was amazed Courtney asked me, because I don't feel like I'm especially doing a lot of grant writing in my current position, but I think it's finding ways that you can be scanning the territory, as it were, without interrupting all the other things you have to do too much. That's why these email newsletters are important, because if nothing else, they'll make you think, oh, and then I usually do something like this. I let the Philanthropy News Digest trigger me that, oh yes, I do need to write a grant for my public program. And then I might go to Grant Gopher and say, whoa, what grants are in arts and culture in Arizona and nationally, and just sort of scan what's coming up. Yeah. And then the other really great tool is make yourself a grant calendar. Mm-hmm. You know, because most of them have the same deadlines every year or close to it. And so once those get imprinted in your mind, you can kind of map out when you have to get what done. And, you know, I have a folder on my desk, for example, that's, you know, grant attachments, right? So I can pretty quickly recycle the grant attachments. And then the narrative, you know, I have other narratives I can usually, you know, I'm not starting from scratch every time, which helps a lot, I think. Yeah. I don't know if that was super.
That's so helpful.
I don't know if it was super helpful.
We'll cover many of these things too in the coming workshops, talking about budget and doing the narrative and breaking down the tasks. So it's super helpful to hear your perspective.
And just realize you know everything you need to know. It's just breaking it into those units. Like the budget, the first time you do it, it's scary, but you know, it's literally just a snapshot of everything you concretely need to do this, right?
Thank you so much.
I hope I didn't overtalk.
Awesome. Oh, no, you were perfect timing. Thank you. So what we're going to take a 5-minute break. so that people can run to the restroom or grab coffee or food. We have food here that's really yummy. And then we're going to dig into actually finding our funding sources, and you're going to be doing some work. We have a tool that we've set up for you to do this. So the last part of the workshop is going to be really practical for you to dig in and also to get help. Courtney will be here to answer questions and to help you find things if you're stuck. So that's what we're going to do after 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to come back together. And now's the nitty-gritty when we're going to do something connected to our own work. So you're going to take some time now. And we have a link that Courtney's going to put in the chat. And if you guys have, how can I get this link to them? I guess you can just see it. But basically what we're going to do is have you do some work in connection to searching for funding, whether it's a fellowship, a grant, small, big, whatever you want to do. And the things you want to do for sure when you're doing this searching is to take time to find what Shiela said is really true. Find something that's a good fit, that you read and you think, oh, I could totally, this matches what I do. If it doesn't seem like a good fit, don't waste your time. And I often look, I have a few heroes, people in my field that are kind of further along than I am, and I totally look at their CV for where they've gotten funding. I also start here on campus with our Humanities Institute and apply for that. That deadline is today or tomorrow, so you may not be able to apply for that, but you could apply for it.
Monday.
It's on Monday. So you probably can't get it together for Monday, but you could start writing it for next year, and you'd have a good shot. You also want to make sure you're eligible. Don't spend time writing a grant if you're a professor and that grant is only for doc students, or vice versa. You want to kind of figure out, or if you're a full professor, don't write for an early career grant because you won't get it. And then once you find things, create bookmarks. So this is how I save information. So I'll find a grant and think, oh, I want to write for this, and then forget about it and never find it again. So now what I do is I bookmark grants and have them there. And in my mind, I know, oh, this is due, a year from September. I'll come back to this page when it gets closer and I'm kind of ready for it. So what we're going to do is go to this form, and Courtney and I have created this so that you can do some of the thinking and writing and work to find a source. And some of you already walked in the door with a source. You know where you're applying. That's awesome. This will still help you. You also, if you know what you're applying and you know it's really competitive, this is a good time to find your plan B so that you have two places. And it's really true what Shiela said about, I actually have written grants that are totally, I'm not always recycling. It depends what you're doing, but I have different research projects and different kinds of grants that I write. But it is true, once you've written one, you have a template in a way so that of understanding what you're doing. You also build relationships with funding sources, like the National Writing Project. I've gotten grants, and I'm a partner with them. I'm on their board of directors. And you build a relationship over time. You know the funding officers. This feels daunting and far away and completely impossible when you haven't written a grant before, but it's true. Like once one thing leads to another and leads to another. So you're going to take some time, and we also created this so that we can help you. So you're going to put this information in, and Courtney and I will have it. We'd love for you to have this filled out by the end of the day on Sunday. If you may need more time than just now, so that Courtney and I can look at it when we meet on Monday and think, how can we help Heather with what she's doing specifically, and what resources can we give her? So we really want to tailor our support for you and what you're trying to do. So I'm going to be quiet and actually let you work. And those of you on Zoom, if you have questions, go in the chat. Courtney is here and helpful. And you can also ask Courtney questions if you're in the room and I can type them in, or you can type them in on chat. And if you want to ask questions that feel kind of private and you don't want it for the greater good, just direct message Courtney and she can help you. So basically you're going to give us an email address, ask why you want to, or answer why you want external funding, what it is that you want to do, what your research discipline is, your research questions, your 5 words. Some of us already have these from the first writing we did. And then what are some local funding sources? And you might need to do some searching, but you can also write to Courtney and say, hey, this is what I want to do. Do you know any local sources? And then what funding sources have you found that are on the periphery of your work? Kind of like what I was showing you with the 4 Cs and the MLA. Those aren't totally my home groups, but they have funding that connects to my work. And then what do you want to do now in the next 4 weeks with this workshop support? What are your goals? Pick one and let's work on that in the next 4 weeks. So is it a fellowship? Is it a seed grant for next year? Is it something for MLA? Whatever it is, let us know so that we can look at it and help you. And then make sure, we want you to read the eligibility requirements carefully and let us know if you're eligible or not. I mean, that seems kind of silly, but you may change your mind as soon as you figure out you're not eligible, right? We don't want to waste time doing something that's not going to work. Does the call for funding require you to first connect with a program officer? Most don't, unless they're really big grants, but some do. They ask you to reach out, and we can teach you and show you how to do that. And I have sample emails and examples I can give you to help you do that. And when will this funding, what will this funding allow you to do that you can't do without it? For me, I set a goal for myself usually. I am in a place now where I have collaborators and we often go in on grants and we're sort of like a grant comes out and we go for it. The collaborators are often looking all the time because they're working at research institutions, they're working off soft money, and then I collaborate with them in my research and they let me know and I'll sort of drop everything to write the grant for that deadline. But more recently, like this year, I just set a goal for myself. I'm gonna write a grant in the fall to help my research that I'm doing, to extend the seed grant I already got last year. And I wrote it and realized there was another call that fit what I had just written. And I wrote 2. And I'm hoping I get 1. But it was pretty easy because they were really similar. And then I ended up writing a grant for the MLA because of this project with my dean. I wasn't planning to write that. It just happened. And it was, so sometimes one thing really does lead to another. And it didn't take it was probably a month worth of my time doing grants and I wasn't writing my article that I'm working on, but it's worth it because it'll allow me to take. So it's sort of like that. Like you have to put a little bit of something aside to focus on this, but it's worth it in the end because it'll give you the support you need to really launch. And one of the grants I ended up writing, I wrote in for an FA to teach my spring class if I get that grant, so then I'll have time to write that I wouldn't have otherwise. So sometimes that's the most valuable thing, is to carve out time for yourself. So I'm not going to talk anymore for a little bit unless you have questions. And Courtney's here and she can answer any questions you have. And you can ask her just through my screen verbally, or you can also email her. Or will you put the email in the chat too? Your email in case people want to email you, Courtney? Or you can direct message her. And then we're just going to have you pull up your screens and start doing some searching. Noon now. And we're just going to take a few more minutes because I know it's lunch hour. But I want to sort of set you up to think about what to do next and what we'll be doing next week. How many of you have done a little bit of searching and have a little bit of an idea or a good idea of what you want to do? Just kind of awesome. How many have no idea? Is there anyone who's like, okay. So what I would love is for you to fill out this form, and you have until Sunday. If it has to be Monday or Tuesday, or this is for you and we want to support you, so do it in a way that works for you. But it'd be most helpful for us, Courtney and I, if you get it to us by Sunday. So on Monday, when she and I meet, we can like look over them and really think about how we can help you. You can also add more information. Like if you're in a position to support grant writing for your research area, like Mary Beth, you might want to say, hey, I want to work on this grant now, but I also really want to maybe focus more on creating more resources to help my area apply for grants. So we can also think about that with you. So we want to make this next 4 weeks as helpful as we can for you and what you're doing. And we want to also really make sure that people on Zoom, that you're feeling like you're getting as much as you would be if you're in person. So just give us what you need so we can help you. Next week, we're going to focus on budget. And so it'd be really helpful to know what you're applying for and how much, if it's $2,000, awesome. If it's $50,000, fabulous. But we just want to know, and then we're going to really work on kind of the concrete breakdown of how to create a budget and how to think about your budget as your argument. Creating your budget is also creating your outcomes. Creating your budget creates your narrative, if that makes sense. Everything in that budget is tied to what you're doing. It's also connected to your timeline. So I start with the budget. I had an amazing budget officer train me to do that early on. And I remember he called me and he's like, let me walk you through this. We're starting with the budget because I had all these grand ideas and they weren't realistic with the amount of funding I had. There's also things that you may want to do, and there's just categories that are unallowable. Like you may want to have a banquet with food, but food's not something you can spend. And Courtney's really helpful in this because she can kind of read the fine print and make it feel less intimidating. So whenever I have a budget, I send a draft to Courtney and say, what do you think about this? And then she'll send me the reality. Like, this actually has fees attached to it. So you have less money than you thought you did. So just know you're not actually doing this alone. You have really smart people who are here to help do that. But by next week, if you can have filled that out by Sunday night, and then if you have a sense of the amount, then we can go from there. We're also going to have a guest speaker, another guest speaker talking about grants next week. And we also, if you have friends or anyone you know who would benefit from doing the budget workshop, this series, you can come to all 4 in a row. It's most helpful to come to all 4 in a row because we're building toward the final turn-in project, but also you can come pop in if you know people who would benefit. So we welcome that as well. And I just want to thank you guys for attending. I really appreciate it. And the Humanities Institute is here really to support funding and resources across all of campus. So you don't have to be in the humanities to be a part of this. Thank you all.